want to look at some sort of forms of cellular communication, either with a nerve coming in, talking to and communicating with something like a muscle, or looking at how hormonal communication can interact with the cell. So let's have a look at how these work. What we've got basically is some sort of nerve fibre coming in. This is an axon, and these will have some sort of myelin sheath here, and this will then go out to a whole series of little, basically, let's draw a few of these out. These are sort of little junctions, I suppose, with the nerve. Let's draw just a few of these, beautifully drawn by me, and these are basically interacting with a cell. So let's draw this round here, and what I've got is the cell nucleus here, and underneath this layer we will have basically all the muscle fibers, the myosin, actin. We'll have our lines going on. If I just draw one of these, we'll have the actin up here, and if I just draw in a different colour, we'll have the myosin in here. Obviously that's going to be throughout, and I'm just drawing one in there just to show you. And so we've got here what I would like to describe as a motor end plate. We've got this is the muscle nucleus. Here we've got our actual muscle fibre, the actual muscle unit. So this whole thing will be a myofibril. Or basic muscle fibre. Now let's have a look and see what's going on down here. So let's sort of zoom in on this little bit and have a look at actually what's going on. And I suppose if I draw this out, we've got this is going to be my axon terminal, and in here we'll have quite a few vesicles containing acetylcholine. This is going to be our synaptic cleft, and it's going to have little junctions along here. Let's just sort of give an idea. And some of these will probably bind to the surface when our electrical signal comes in. And just as a normal synapse works with the calcium, we're going to get these vesicles containing acetylcholine, and they're going to release. And what we're going to have a few different sort of receptors here on this sort of surface. We're going to have and what they're going to do here is we're going to have the acetylcholine binding to these, and as that happens then we're going to open up some sodium channels, and this is going to result in some depolarization. So we've obviously got to have quite a lot of mitochondria in here, because they're going to power all of this. And in fact on the other side, in this part of the membrane, not actually inside there, we're going to have quite a lot of mitochondria in here, because they've got to supply the ATP for the powering of the muscle. So what's going to happen? Well, if we want to look here, then the muscular contraction is going to be triggered when this action potential arrives at this neuromuscular junction. So there are many sort of neuromuscular junctions along the length of the muscle, and I've tried to give you an idea of that here, so that basically when the nerve fires, all the muscle fibers contract simultaneously. If there was only one here, then basically the muscle fibers wouldn't contract together, and this probably wouldn't be as powerful. It would also be much slower, and this means that a wave of contraction would go along a muscle, and this really wouldn't be very helpful if you wanted to have fine muscular control. So when this action potential reaches this neuromuscular junction, it's going to stimulate these calcium ion channels to open. Calcium ions will then diffuse from the synapse into the synaptic knob. So we'll label that one there. They're then going to cause these synaptic vesicles to fuse with the presynaptic membrane. Acetylcholine will be released by exocytosis. They're going to diffuse across the synapse. They're going to bind to the receptors on this postsynaptic membrane, the sarcolemma, and that's going to open up these sodium ion channels, and it's going to result in some sort of depolarization. The acetylcholine that's here will be broken down by an enzyme present in here, which is going to be acetylcholine esterase, and that's going to turn my choline, acetylcholine in here, into choline, ethanoic acid, which will prevent the muscle being overstimulated. As in the other sort of brain sort of synaptic membranes, this choline and ethanoic acid diffuse back into the neurone, where they're combined back into acetylcholine using energy provided by the mitochondria. So we've got this coming in, we've got almost a standard type of synapse, and then we're also going to get some sort of depolarization of this particular sarcolemma, and that travels deep into the muscle fibre, spreading around through these tiny little tubes that go round, which resemble endoplasmic reticulum. This is the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and it again contains lots of calcium ions which it actively absorbs, and when the action potential reaches this sarcoplasmic reticulum, stimulates all these calcium ions to open, the channels to open, the calcium ions diffuse down their concentration gradient, and that puts lots of calcium ions into this sarcoplasm. And as we looked at before, the calcium ions bind to the troponin, causing it to change shape and allows the muscle to move. So there we've got some sort of explanation about how the neuromuscular junction links in with basically a muscle. So not very different really to how a normal synapse works. Now I want to look at a different form of communication, and this is hormonal communication. Hormonal communication we've got powered by an endocrine gland. Endocrine gland is simply going to release some sort of chemical directly into the bloodstream, and as it does that, then what's going to happen, it's got to go around the bloodstream, it's going to find a cell that's got a suitable receptor and do something. So let's have a look and see what it does. So let's just choose here some sort of endocrine gland, and the endocrine glands we've got are things like the pituitary, producing growth hormone and various gonadotropins. We've got perhaps the thyroid gland producing thyroxine. We've got the adrenal gland producing adrenaline, which is going to, these are all affecting multiple types of cells. So all of these are going to produce a hormone of some description, which is basically a protein, and this hormone will travel around the bloodstream to its target cells. Now we're going to try and work out what's going to happen. Well, we've got two choices. Our first choice is we're going to have some sort of steroid sort of based hormone. These are going to be lipid soluble. Now this is simply going to mean they can enter the cell. They simply basically here bind to a steroid hormone receptor, and these receptors may be present in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus depending on the hormone, and they're then going to make some sort of transcription factor. So we've got here bind to some sort of hormone receptor, and this is going to somehow allow some sort of transcription factor. An example of this would be estrogen. So estrogen, example of a hormone that would actually enter the cell and do something. Our other choice is having a non-steroid hormone. What's this going to do? Well, these are basically hydrophilic. That means they're not going to enter the cell membrane, so these will need to bind to something on the surface of the cell. And by binding to something on the surface of the cell, they've then got to basically trigger what we'll call a cascade reaction. And that will then create a second messenger. And an example of this is adrenaline. So what's our difference between hormonal and our nervous communication, our neuronal communication? Well, basically we've got a hormone not released into a particular target cell in a particular location, but throughout the whole body. It's going to be slower, the hormones, in getting there, but much more wide-reaching. So instead of acting on a target bit of muscle and telling that to contract, now this time we're going for a whole series of different cells and affecting them. So hormones such as insulin, glucagon, they're going to have wide-ranging effects on controlling blood glucose throughout the body, whereas something else is going to sort of work much more specifically. So what sort of changes might we get here? Well, let's see if we can list them out. So if I draw up a brief little table, we've got here a hormone, and we've got neural communication. This sort of comes up in exam questions, try and do these sort of things. So communication here is via obviously a hormone, a chemical messenger, whereas this one is going to be by an electrical or nerve impulse. This is going to be sent round by the bloodstream, and this one is delivered direct by the actual nerve. This is going to be slow, whereas the nerve, even something on the sympathetic or parasympathetic, is going to be fast by comparison. We've got this travelling to all parts of the body, whereas this is here very much targeted. Our response then here is widespread, because it's going to all parts, whereas this is very localized. As well as the transmission, let's do that. The transmission is slow. Here we could also say the response is actually slow, whereas here we've got the response is rapid. This is a long-lasting response, whereas this one is very short-lived. And sometimes we may find that these effects can be permanent and irreversible, whereas these are very much temporary and obviously they are reversible. Thinking here of hormones, especially the sex hormones, these can make permanent changes to the body and basically they are irreversible. So this is our system of our nerves sending round. So we've got a whole variety of different sort of chemicals being produced. If we look at perhaps just one of those very quickly, we might look at the adrenal gland. And the adrenal gland here sitting on top of the kidney, and this is going to produce different types of hormones. So we understand that we've got some of these different hormones, but we've got also from the adrenal cortex, we've got androgens. Small amounts of male and female sex hormones are released, and their impact is relatively small compared with large amounts of hormones such as estrogen or testosterone. They're important to women, especially after menopause. We've got the produced in the cortex and the androgens. We've got the mineral corticoids. These are basically, the main one produced is aldosterone, which helps control blood pressure, maintain the balance between the amount of salt and water concentration in the blood, and it's mediated by the kidney. And there we've also got some glucocorticoids. And one of those is cortisol, which helps regulate metabolism by controlling how the body converts fats, proteins, carbohydrates into energy. Another one of those is corticosterone, which works with the cortisol to help regulate immune response, suppress the inflammatory reactions. But inside the adrenal gland, we've also got a centre bit, and we'll call this the medulla. And this is responsible for producing adrenaline, which increases the heart rate, sending blood quickly to all the muscles and brain. And we also get noradrenaline. Noradrenaline here working with adrenaline in response to stress. Increases the heart rate, widens the pupils, winds the air passages to the lungs, and narrows the blood vessels to the non-essential organs. So these sort of hormones control all sorts of things. And let's look at how this might work, how this hormonal control might sort of do something. So what we've got is basically our cell membrane. This is our phospholipid bilayer. I'm not going to draw it all out because it's going to take way too long. So we've got this phospholipid bilayer, and what I'll have in here is some sort of protein, and this is going to be my receptor protein. And along comes my hormone, and my hormone will fit into this basic receptor. Now, inside the cell, I'm going to have some sort of other protein. Let's think of now let's having another sort of protein in here. Let's give us a sort of another shaped protein, and this is one which is adenyl cyclase. Now, when this hormone binds, this protein, which happens to be called a G protein in this case, does some activation of the adenyl cyclase. And what that does, that takes some ATP and it turns this ATP into cyclic AMP. Now, we might have down here some sort of channel protein, and this cyclic AMP will have some sort of effect maybe on this channel protein, which will allow something in or out, or the cyclic AMP could in fact bind to some sort of enzyme and here we've got some sort of secondary binding site, and the CAMP will bind to that and cause a conformational change in this enzyme. So now my enzyme here is going to be activated. So we've got either this type of mechanism of hormonal communication. This was my type 2 coming through. I'll be back in a sec.
Paul Evans would like to talk. Paul Evans would like to talk.
It's alright, I've just got
It's Paul.
I'll deal with that one in a moment. So we've either got this sort of stuff coming in, or number one, we've got my membrane, which doesn't act as a barrier at all, and my steroid type hormone comes through, and as it comes through, so what we get is some binding directly from my other type of hormone into some sort of receptor protein that's sitting there, and this could be an enzyme that's activated, or it could be some sort of other basically receptor protein. And that is how we're going to achieve communication here via either hormones, two methods, or via neural communication to things like muscles, or in fact even endocrine glands. Quite short, that one, but it shows and makes the point about what happens. If you like this and it's helpful, please then like and subscribe, and I will see you next time when we do some more A-level biology topic by topic. Until then, take care. Bye bye.